Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we're going to talk about Kierkegaard's The Sickness Unto Death.
Yes, cheerful little book. I wanted to get Scott into continental philosophy at some point, and I was trying to figure out when to do. And I was reading some Heidegger the other day, and I thought, I'm not going to inflict that on him, but I thought this one would be good. So Kierkegaard is a Danish philosopher, lived till 1855, I think. I can't quite recall. If you had to categorize him, he might be founder of existentialism, except that that's too broad. I mean, what is it? The question of what existentialism is, it ends up being more of a mood than a philosophy, so I don't even know if that works. Enemy of Hegel.
Yay!
Makes fun of Hegel a lot, but you kind of have to have read a bunch of Hegel to get the jokes. Very concerned with the self, and concerned with questions of what it means to have faith, what Christianity is, if it's anything. You can imagine being surrounded by Danish Lutherans the Danish Lutheran State Church, and having some kind of reaction to it. So I picked this one. This is The Sickness Unto Death is a book about despair. I really don't know how to start talking about it.
This is the one of the guys that if you want to bang art school chicks, you should be able to say stuff about Kierkegaard.
No, it's if you want to hang out with Missouri Synod Lutheran chicks.
Oh. Well, I don't know about that. He's one of those guys, that people say stuff about Nietzsche or Kierkegaard or whatever. And I had read a little bit. This is the most that I have read. Boy, it sure seems like all the continentals. It seems like there ought to be a better way of conveying their contents of their minds to mine than they do.
Well, so you mentioned Nietzsche. I think you could put Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky in a box. Mm-hmm. They're similar. The last two of them come up with different answers than the first one. But, you have this late 18th century, early 19th century idea that the Enlightenment has succeeded, and that if you just follow the plan, Hegel has the whole system worked out, and Kierkegaard makes a joke at one point. You have the whole thing worked out, but what do you do at 4 p.m? So that's kind of the nub of existentialism. It's like, there you are, and everything's been worked out for you, and everything should be fine, and you should be happy, but you're not.
Yeah, so the sickness unto death is despair.
Yeah.
And we're reading this. We read the Signet Classics. Here's right? That's what I got.
Yep.
Yeah.
Penguin Classics.
Penguin Classics. So we're reading this in translation, and he's a Dane. There's some difficulties with this thing. Like he says, Book 1, A, he's got a lot of alphas and betas and A's and ones and stuff, is titled, That Despair is the Sickness Unto Death. So despair is the sickness unto death. Well, despair is a fraught word for most of us. And it was very difficult for me to get on board with him early because I was carrying my idea of what despair is. And I don't think that for him it is necessary. It is what I talk about despair. And it is also, when I say despair, it is also a number of other things. It is not just the sort of gloomy hopelessness where you hang your head, and it's not just that.
No, he has a particular meaning. I want to go back. That's what I mentioned about that little trilogy, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky. So there you are in Russia or in Germany or in Denmark. Nietzsche was in Switzerland,
Illinois,
later on, or Illinois, and everything's great, and you should be happy. Why can't you just be happy? As your friends were telling you. Well, something's wrong. Well, what's wrong? Well, you see, that's where it gets obscure. And so you complain about the style of 19th century continental philosophy and even 20th century continental philosophy. There's something wrong, but I don't know quite how to tell you. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you'll see a lot of this I'm just watching Milton the cat walk around here. A lot of this in our friend Walker Percy, that his characters are all straight out of a Kierkegaard book. Everything's going great, and yet it's not good. And so you can imagine, who is the older lady in The Moviegoer? The one who had everything figured out? His aunt, I think.
Aunt, yeah, I can't remember her name.
And so Aunt Agatha says, well, what's the matter, Binks? Nothing's the matter. That's the answer. You say nothing's the matter, and yet something's the matter. So the style of the book is obscure. I think it kind of has to be. I know you don't like that.
Well, I don't know that I don't know. Okay. So the two main difficulties for me in the book, the three. One is the style. Two, what does he mean by despair? And I had to read a number of pages, about 150, to figure out what I think he might mean by despair. And I think that his despair is a dis-ease. Well, wait, I'll get back to that. And the other one is his notion of the self. So if I got the despair, if we're on the same page, Kierkegaard and I, with despair, and we're on the same page, Soren and I, about self, then the book kind of comes together. He says right there, first paragraph of the thing, the self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which is it's relating to itself. Full stop. The self is not the relation, but the relations relating to itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
perfectly clear.
I get it. I actually do get it. I had to read it several times. I'm going to say some words that might not be exactly right, but they don't have to be exactly right. Ding Dong Sam Harris talks about the hard question of consciousness. Like, what is the thing that experiences the consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
That just kills determinists and materialists. The self is that. The self is the thing that experiences the experience of being a self.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know what that is. It's really hard to figure out, if there's, what is it that experiences Karlness, the 600 deadlift barrier. Sorry, man. What is it that does that,
So it's a tricky thing. So this is, I read, probably because I read Percy first, I read my Kierkegaard like Walker Percy does. But he has this experiment you can do about the self. I think it's in Lost in the Cosmos, that you can write down a series of adjectives, positive adjectives, and then right next to them you can put their opposites. And then you can go down the positive list and you can say, yeah, that's me. And then you can go down the negatives and say, yeah, that's me. The self kind of isn't really anything.
It's the perceiver of all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Except, well, it's not nothing, but it's kind of nothing.
Well, I want to make this show very short. No, I'm not. I want to try. So I want to read it again. The self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which is it's relating to itself, period.
I think it's, or that in the relation which is relating to itself.
Or that, okay, I'll do it again then. The self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which is it's relating to itself. The self is not the relation, but the relations relating to itself. Okay. That second sentence clarifies it for me a little more than the first one. Although I get the first one, it takes a little bit, pencil, paper, yellow pad, whatever. The self is not the relation, but the relations relating to itself. So if I get all Thomist or Aristotelian, you would say, well, how does the relation relate? Well, it can't. That's a paradox. There has to be something outside of the relation to observe the relation, I think.
So you were asking if there was a payoff, and there is, except I want to hold off on the answer. First, I want to go back to the title, Sickness unto Death. In the introduction, Kierkegaard makes mention, this is the Lazarus story, when Jesus is going to visit his friend Lazarus, and Lazarus is sick. They tell him that he's sick, you better come quick. And he said, this sickness is not unto death. Well, it actually was. He died. However, if for a believing Christian, death is not unto death. But despair might be. So it's setting it up as despair actually is worse than death. Worse than physical death, which I think might be right. So back in the first paragraph, if it's a relation, what's it a relation between? So he says, a human being is a synthesis of the infinite and the finite, of the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity. In short, a synthesis. A synthesis is a relation between two terms. Looked at it in this way, a human being is not yet a self. So it's not just enough to have the infinite and the finite. It's the relation between them. And
no, the self is the relations relating
yes
to itself. How meta.
Yeah,
These guys.
I know.
See, this is why those art school chicks dig it. Basement flooded.
You sound interesting when you talk like this.
This hot Kierkegaard talk.
So there I am. Let's see. There I am about to do my bench pressing, and so I am in relationship to the weight. The problem is if I start thinking about the bench press, not just doing it, not just doing the act, but there I am. I'm getting ready to unrack, and I start thinking about my relationship to the weight, and then my body's relationship to the weight. Is it going to be able to do it? Then I start relating to the relation. And that's where I think for weightlifting, for example, it's often better not to be a self.
Right.
So I'm just trying to shed a little bit of light. It's not my muscles and the weight that's the problem. It's my thinking about the relationship between my muscles and the weight.
So I think it's a good illustration, Karl, that you just gave.
Thank you.
So I read this and I thought, here we go. Some of this kind of stuff. And then I read it again and I went, yeah, it's definitely some of this kind of stuff. And then I did what I normally do. As I said, well, if this is pretty tough, then I need to kind of figure out where I'm at first. So he starts off by saying, blah, blah, blah. What is spirit? Blah, blah, blah. But what is the self? So I said to myself, self? What is the self? So I tried to figure out for myself what I thought that might be. Mm-hmm. And then I went back and tackled it again. And I see that, what he's saying, I think, maps on to my phenomenology. What it's like for me to figure out what a self is, where my selfness is, and what it does, and what roles does it play. I'm
just imagining our listeners just getting stuck in the 7 different uses of self you had in that last sentence.
I know.
I'm sorry, that's the way it is. You're trying to figure out. You can't look in a mirror to see who you are. Okay, you just try it. Try to figure out your own character. And character's not quite the same thing as a self, but even that's hard to do. You're going to come up with contrary things that could both be true for you. Maybe you can get, like, other people will say they have an impression of you. You're not sure it's true.
Oh, I'm sure it's not.
I would say it's impossible. It's very hard to figure out exactly what you are.
I had a friend who was in her late 80s, and I said, what's it like to be 88 versus when you were 28 or whatever? And she said, it's all the same looking out.
Yeah.
Because the self ain't her. I mean, it's not her body. It's not the arthritis. The thing that was looking out processed everything the same way that it always had. Maybe she couldn't put her KitchenAid mixer on the top shelf in the kitchen anymore, but looking out, it was all the same. Like the self was unchanged.
Yeah. The self is the thing that's doing the looking, except to call it a thing is probably too much. It's the looking.
Yeah.
And you can't turn around and look at it.
I think, is this guy not Catholic?
This guy is Lutheran.
Nah, he just thought
allegedly.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Right.
He was not in a happy relationship with the Danish Lutheran Church.
Anything past 1540, I have harder and harder time reading anything newer than that. These kids these days, they're worrying about these problems and mulling all this stuff around and woollying it around. And it seems to me like so many of these problems had been dealt with, like by very bright people in very succinct ways. This despair, which is the sickness unto death, whether you agree with this or not, whether you like it or not, whether these words are off-putting to you or not, the doctrine of original sin deals with this.
Mm-hmm.
So, he can woolly around on this and what's the self and what's despair, what are the 32 flavors of despair and all of that. And he's making shit up just like anybody else is. I mean, so why don't we just make up something clean and tidy? Like there's something broken in us that we cannot shake. And it causes us a great deal of distress. and it takes us out of alignment. Like, later in the book, he starts talking about some of the causes of despair, and one of the main causes of despair is feeling like you can't be yourself, or being yourself and not being happy with that. Well, that pretty much covers all of it. Like,
Yep.
He doesn't give a lot of prescriptions for cures, but just some sort of mindfulness meditation, non-judgmental contemplative work, could take us out of that from time to time. We got these old fathers that wrote about this, and then here he is, licking this calf over again. I get so tired of it.
Probably in, when did Thomas die? 1270? Thereabouts?
Too early.
He hit his head on a tree. Well, he was on his way to be made a bishop.
Because of this.
He was 49, and then he died and was not made a bishop, and that was probably a good thing. So one of the things about reading medieval history, there's people doing bad things, just like always. But you get a case like Henry II of England, who has his friend killed, which was good for his political situation. He had Thomas Becket killed. Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? And his baron said, we'll do it. And they went and did it.
Oh, I didn't mean it. I was just...
He had plausible deniability. And so, terrible thing. And then, 6 months later, he's on his knees in front of the monks, bare to the waist, getting whipped in penance. And it's probably real penance. It's probably real repentance. You had people doing things, and then I think the relationship of them to the infinite was a little more healthy than Kierkegaard always calls his hometown the market town, Copenhagen. I guess that's what it means. Just market town. Where you could think that you were perfectly good.
Hague means hedge.
I don't know Danish.
Well, that's the only Danish. I know some cuss words.
I go to IKEA.
Because they always have these trials at the Hague.
Mm-hmm.
It means the hedge. Copenhagen. I don't know.
So you could live a life where you go to church every Sunday, you do everything that's required of you, you pay your taxes. And what he means by despair, spoiler, is not to be in relationship with the infinite.
Because I think he doesn't say this, or if he did, I didn't miss it, because I tried to read the last part of it really fast. Like the way you take medicine.
Yep.
If the self is the relations relating to itself, you can't pick that thing up and put it in a box. That's not concrete, and that's not even abstract. I mean, that's meta. That is a something that arises out of two abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my friend said it's all the same looking out. Well, what is it? That's the self. I've got a self, that experience of talking to her. But that is entirely personal. In our very finest moments, our spouses may get a glimpse of that thing that we experience as self,
mm-hmm.
but rarely and darkly, maybe.
Yeah.
But if there is this creator that he talks about, then it can have knowledge of that self.
Yeah.
So you have to bring yourself in alignment with that notion, and that so that self can be acknowledged, and then everything can be in alignment.
Yeah.
And all the pieces fall together. I
want to go back a little further. So back to Brother Thomas. There's a question in Aquinas about individuation, how you get knowledge of something down to the individual level. And it turns out you can't in Aquinas, because knowledge comes from abstractions. It comes from abstracting the form of the thing, and it's always an abstraction. There was a guy named John Duns Scotus, didn't like that one. He would have another form, thisness, haikitas.
Right, being, Parmenides. Here we go.
Well, but if I'm trying to know you, that I can't know you intellectually. It's impossible. And probably nobody can, except maybe the one that set you up.
And if we're making something up about that, what's so bad about making that up versus the functionally MRI Rorschach picture that Sam Harris is making up about it? About the hard question of consciousness. You know what I mean?
Well, but he can't get there either.
Right. So if you're making shit up, why don't we just make up something that has some sort of explanatory power and provides at least some comfort? And by the way, my faith is not that cynical. But like, why can't some autismo like that who is so cynical, like, why can't he at least look for a solution that even if he thinks, I mean, it's at least as sensical as the one he provides, but this one provides some sort of comfort and some sort of order.
Because it provides explanatory power, comfort, and order.
Oh, okay. So he's a nihilist.
No, but that's the problem is, look, the self is an unknowable thing, okay? Mm-hmm. I think this infinite is really important. The infinite and the finite, the temporal, the eternal, the freedom and necessity. So a human, he thinks, when he talks about spirit, I think this is from Hegel, the thing that spirit means is capable of freedom. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in German,
which is the problem? It's in here, freedom.
Well, it's not nothing, but it kind of is nothing, and it's sort of the problem. In German, the humanities are called. I really do make sense.
That was some goth stuff you said.
But don't ask me to repeat what I just said. In German, spirit is Geist. And the humanities are not called the humanities. They're called the Geisteswissenschaften. The sciences of the spirit. In other words, the sciences of things that are capable of having freedom. So things like art and music, literature. These are things that free critters do. I was out driving this morning and saw a bunch of cow critters out. They don't have art. They don't have Geisteswissenschaften. They don't have humanities because they don't have any freedom. At least it sure seems that way. To have an answer that is super simple, well, here's what you do. It's going to end up being false because, what do you do it for in the afternoon?
Possibility. He puts forth all of these opposites and then describes how this despair crops up out of these things. Like possibility and necessity are two sources of despair, two different kinds of despair. And the possibility, freedom, right? That's one way. That's one kind of freedom, the possibility. If you go to the soup Nazi's place, you can't have a sandwich. You're not free to have sandwiches. It's not liberty, but the possibilities are limited, and that can cause some kind of despair. Like you need some sandwiches, but if you go to the Chinese restaurant that has like the 42 pages and all the dishes are numbered and they have a picture of every one of them, like there's just too many possibilities. You just tug your hair out trying to figure out what to have. And they can both cause this relation that relates to its relations to experience. I don't know. But I got to say that again, like this, like for me, despair is like this sort of hopelessness. And like his despair can contain that, but it's also just, I think, just a dis-ease with the self.
Yeah, well, you might not experience any dis-ease at all. You might just be perfectly comfortable, but never have dealt with that you're actually making free choices. So there you are in the Chinese restaurant. I was going to give another example. You've just graduated high school, and the world's your oyster, and you have to make a choice. And you're paralyzed, and so you going to everybody, what should I do? What should I do? You're trying to take that burden away from yourself. I think that's probably despair. I think the way out of it, so there you are in the Chinese restaurant, you say, you know what?
You throw a dart.
I'm going to have the egg foo young. I'm going to make this choice. And it might be good and it might not be good, but it's my choice. I'm making it happen through my act of free will, and realize it just might suck. It might be the worst egg foo young on the planet. Living in freedom is, that's like, so go back to Henry II. Henry II had his friend killed and then had to go do penance. I think that was probably a free act, as opposed to, say, a modern politician who
goes on Oprah and apologizes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I was going to go a different way, but does something wrong. That wrong's in scare quotes because is anything really wrong now? But does something wrong, is caught in it, and that's the only time they ever would do this anyway. They have to be caught, and then will go on Oprah and do the acceptable things that one does. So that one does, he says that somewhere in this book about you just get caught up in what everybody does, and it wasn't really a free choice. You didn't really go on there and take account for your free act. You just did the thing that everybody does when they get caught with their pants down.
the act of penance would restore order and allow him to get rid of some of that despair.
Yes, but penance requires a relation to the infinite.
Ugh,
Don't you hate the way they talk?
I do.
I'm sorry.
Let me talk about ordering food. I don't order food at restaurants the way I used to, Carl. I don't look at the menu until the lady walks up and takes the order, and I just pick something. But because I've realized that I don't even care. Because I'm not actually buying that particular thing. Now, maybe when you go to the restaurant, listener, you're headed there for the prime rib. I'm there to go with my wife and be with my wife, and neither of us have to prepare the food. Neither of us have to clean up the plates. The food is the fourth thing.
Oh, we're paying for the cleanup.
Anyway, there's no despair. The menu's there. I don't even look. I don't even care. I just don't order from the seafood thing because I'm in Oklahoma and that's risky. And so I just, I get some.
Unless it's catfish.
I don't do that either. Unless I got a hankering for catfish flung on me and then I go to the catfish place. But he says that to be able to despair is a good thing.
Yeah. Because if you're able to despair, you're able to repent. It means you have a relation to the infinite. I want to read the very end of the first section. The big table of contents is making fun of Hegel, but once again, you have to read Hegel to get all the jokes. He really is funny. I told that to Scott, and he said, I haven't laughed yet.
Well, he got me in the last quarter of the book. I smirked a little.
Let's see. So this then is the formula which describes the state of the self when despair is completely eradicated. In relating to itself and in wanting to be itself, the self is grounded transparently in the power that established it. For me, that's if Henry II was actually repentant. Grounded in the whatever it was that established it. In other words, well, it's a Christian book. In other words, God made you a self, and it's being in relation to that is going to make it not despair. Maybe, if you do it right.
No, I buy that. I made a face because I was just thinking about all the new atheists. I'm just so tired of all the arguments they make because we just medieval people just dealt with those things cleanly and nicely 1,000 years ago, 1,200, 1,400 years ago. They're why am I good if I don't believe? And how do I come on. Oh, please, you can partake in.
Well, they might not be good at all. I liked what he taught. He talked in here about what he says the pagans had splendid vices.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things. So he's talking about pre-Christian world, and you had all these people who would do noble deeds and everything. But we were reading Seneca and Tacitus for online great books, and when you get to these are Romans under Nero. And Tacitus is writing about Nero after Nero died. Gosh, they killed themselves a lot.
Yeah.
The emperor would just, make a motion that you were not pleasing to him, and then you're expected to go off and take a bath and open your veins. Or Cato. Cato killed himself rather than submit to Julius Caesar, and I guess he sort of botched it. He's trying to do a Mishima, and he didn't quite manage it, and they're trying to save him, and he says no, and he reaches in and he grabs his intestines and yanks them out, and just to make sure that he died. And so Plutarch and all these people write about how noble Cato was, and you're reading wow, these are some hard people. But then thinking about it as splendid vices, because they didn't, if the story's right, they didn't have any relationship to the infinite. And so the best they could do was going to be vices.
People that can do that kind of thing, hang themselves with their guts and stuff. Their conception of self is different than modern people's. I mean, it's just, you're right about the relationship to the infinite, that weird pantheon of, all that, Mm-hmm. But yeah, they have a completely different conception of self. Yeah. So you said infinite. He didn't drop God in there until in the last book of the book. It's the infinite.
Yeah.
Right. So, if this stuff bumps you, Sam Harris, infinite. All right, fine. Quit being all weirded out by these words.
Well, it's, it's freedom. So on page 45 you don't have my page numbers, do you?
I don't know.
Talking about despair. The possibility of this sickness is man's advantage over the beast. To be aware of this sickness is a Christian advantage over natural man. To be cured of this sickness is a Christian's blessedness. And I was just watching the cat walk across the desk here. And Milton is a beast, I guess. Mm-hmm. Therefore, as far as we can tell, is not afflicted with freedom. And Milton has no possibility of despair. Milton could get sick. Milton could, I suppose, be sad. Mammals seem to be sad sometimes. We're always projecting on what they think. We're never quite sure what a cat thinks. I think what cat thinks is they're planning your death. That they're just never getting around to it because you keep feeding them. I think that's the cat inner life. But they don't have a possibility of despair because they don't have, as far as we know, a relation to the infinite. They don't choose anything. They generally do the same things every day in the same way. Whereas humans can, just completely we don't always do it, but you can just completely change and do something else, do something unexpected, break stuff. The weirdest thing about humans is that you can be, for me, boredom is one of these concepts that reveals something about humans. What boredom means is you're in a good situation and somehow it's no longer good.
Right.
And that's weird. So I go to the restaurant every day. Maybe I go to the diner, once a week, and I get the meatloaf.
I've had my favorite meal 40 times in a row. I'm so bored with it.
Is it not good the 41st time? It's still good. You're just different. It's really weird. Fashion, the clothing that you had that in 1975 was the best clothing in the world somehow isn't any good anymore. I'm talking about bell bottoms, which were awesome.
Unless you're on a bicycle.
That's true. They'd be a little frayed on the inside. There's something odd about the human being. And so despair might actually be... Scott was reading this and saying, well, I guess everybody's always in despair. And yeah, that might be.
Yeah, he says something about, you not being in despair is a sign that you're in despair.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm right about this, but when I started to come to terms with what I think he's terming as despair, maybe I can agree with him on that. For me, despair is a very stark sense of hopelessness that results in inaction, and it's coupled with sadness and whatever. But his despair is more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's not just being sad. He has an example on page 50. It can be despair that you have a self that you can't get rid of. So a young girl despairs of love. She despairs over losing the loved one because he died or became unfaithful. Just try now. Just try saying to such a girl, you're eating yourself up, and you'll hear her reply, oh no, the pain is just that I can't.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
To be sad and it's like you can't solve the problem. The problem is that you are the person who had the gentleman be unfaithful, and you can't get rid of being the person that is.
Yeah, that this girl says, oh, that's the problem. I can't eat myself up. And he says that the danger can be that there's a certain kind of despair that is a hopelessness, like you can't even die. Mm-hmm. I get that. I think we've said on here before, there are things worse than death. Well, if there are things worse than death, there's some things that you might rather die than. Mm-hmm. But we're stuck in this position where I don't think you ought to kill yourself.
I'm not planning to. Page 51, if there were nothing eternal in a man, he would simply be unable to despair. When you are in despair, what he's talking about here, it doesn't make you go away. And that's part of the problem.
Oh, gosh. On my page 52, he says, not to be in despair may mean precisely to be in despair. And it may also mean having been saved from being in despair. And my note, whether that is, this book's bullshit.
Yeah.
Aristotle tells me that you can't not be in despair, and that mean precisely to be in despair. Yeah. So if language means anything, then his sentence has to be ignored or run away from or something.
No, you have to figure out what it means. That's what we do here.
It doesn't, Aristotle would say it doesn't mean anything. He just stepped on his shoelaces.
I'm trying to find the quote in my book.
Did I write this book's bullshit in your book too?
No, he didn't. Not to be in despair may mean precisely to be in despair, and it may also mean having been saved from being in despair. All right, so
I buy the last piece.
You might not be in despair. There's got to be an equivocation on being in despair. So if you are genuinely not in despair, good for you. It means having been saved from being in despair. Or if it's not being in despair, as in I don't think I'm in it.
But he didn't say that. Again,
Well, no.
Back to Hambrick's theory. He had the command of the language. He could have said that, but he didn't.
But he's a continental philosopher.
He said
he's trying to make you chew on it.
Not to be in despair. Chew on what? It's a paradox. It doesn't mean anything. It's a koan. It's the sound of one hand clapping this thing.
No, the problem is there you are in Denmark. Okay. There you are in Denmark.
Picture it.
Everything's orderly. You're living in Copenhagen. You have the Danish state church, which I believe still exists. Although there are actually, I think, there are avowed atheists who are serving as pastors in the Danish state Lutheran church, and it's not a disqualification.
Sounds good.
And everything's going great. And what you're trying to do is to poke at that and say, you know what? It's not going great. And so you think you are in despair. In this case, Mr. Danish state churchgoer, that means you actually are. If you think everything's great, that means you've completely missed the point. Especially if you're going to be a Christian and take it seriously, and Paul says, work out your salvation in fear and trembling, and you have no fear or trembling, something's wrong.
But he says, not to be in despair may mean precisely to be in despair.
Yeah.
Quit making excuses for this. This is come on. He could have written all the things that you just said. And
He does in the rest of the book.
Well, yeah, then this should have had the red line in editing. And there's quite a bit of this in here.
I have a higher tolerance for this stuff, I think.
For when whatever causes a person to despair occurs, it is immediately evident that he has been in despair his whole life.
Yep. Absolutely. What that means is you were not in the right relationship to the infinite. Your self was ungrounded, and then something happens, and all of a sudden you're in despair. That means you already were.
So, then despair doesn't mean what my modern conception of despair is. And
no.
It means it's original sin. The thing's busted, whether you get it or not, and when the hard times come, the rent in the fabric is exposed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to put it.
Kierkegaardian despair is not an emotional state.
No.
Although it can be.
Yes.
Or can lead to it.
Yes, I'm just going to say contradictory things for the rest of the podcast.
You're a great help. I'm going to read a review, Karl. Hemingway Hero. He shit on the Music and Ideas podcast.
Yes.
Because we don't like Dylan.
I walked back my Dylan hatred 2 notches. It was at 100, now it's at 98.
Okay.
So Hemingway Hero, you moved me. 2 notches. Sorry.
That's interesting. 98. We're going to have you put some others. Like, where did the Rolling Stones go?
88.
Who's at 1 or 0? Is 0 possible?
For me not hating them?
Yeah. Pure unadulterated love is 0.
Led Zeppelin.
Really? Mm-hmm. Even Jimmy Page's sloppy guitar?
Yep. I listened to Led Zeppelin start to finish. It's not a bad track.
No, there's not a bad track, but there's some bad notes.
Okay, put them at 1.
Oh, okay. But he left a wonderful review here. He says, the Midwestern valued barbell and farm familiar moderators themselves, whose trenchant discussion of the beauty and meaning found in life's simple wants and wishes, and their much richer and more complicated ordinariness, raised this podcast above most others. Scott and Karl's ostensibly old-fashioned enthusiasm for the fun that's found in reading great books belies a concern for what's missing amid the popularly political and intensely conflictual media discourse, and provides a different picture from what we tend to think about this country. Their compellingly plain and paradoxically simple discussion. Is this a compliment?
I think so.
Simple discussion of ideas, the importance books play in providing depth and meaning to our daily existence, give a sense and sort of corrective to one's perspective of the country's complex identity, as well as permission to question and actually think about what it all means. Wow. Thank you.
That's like a continental philosopher.
Well, that's wonderful. So I will forgive you for your love of Bob Dylan because of your love for us. Now, thanks for leaving the reviews, even the Dylan review on the Music and Ideas show. If you get a chance, send a review in to Stitcher, Google Play, wherever, because that seems to help. That seems to help a lot. Thank you, Hemingway Hero. We need to read some Hemingway, and I have a question about Hemingway, and it's the same question I have about John Cougar Mellencamp.
Okay.
Genius or retard? John Cougar Mellencamp, he's like a little ditty about Jack and Diane. It's just this beautiful, simple little song, and it just paints this beautiful, simple picture that just everybody can see it when they hear the song. And either that's the only thing he's got, like he just sees everything. Everything looks like Duplo Legos to him, and it's just simple and clear cut for him, or he sees everything and can excise it to the pure essence of teenage love. Mellencamp and Hemingway.
I don't know about Mellencamp. I think Hemingway is genius. Because it's hard to write.
No, they both have to be the same thing. In my question, they both have to be the same.
Gets a promotion.
Oh, okay. Somebody's going to give me a bad review because I used the R word. R word.
Yeah, but it's about John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yeah.
Cougar. Is that really his middle name?
He was Johnny Cougar for a while. Now he's John Mellencamp, I think.
Yeah.
Jack and Diane. I remember when that came out. I was a little kid. I hadn't had a Diane yet. And I thought, oh, God, that just sounds so wonderful. So wonderful. He says, well, in there, Diane, we better run off to the city. She says, baby, we ain't doing nothing. Yeah.
So let me pull a few more things out here. So in my book, page 55, despair is exactly man's unconsciousness of being characterized as spirit. All right, so it is not a feeling, it's a state. And so he says, even what humanly speaking is the most beautiful and loveliest thing of all, a womanly youthfulness which is sheer peace and harmony and joy, is nevertheless despair. Okay, so you read that, you think your BS detector goes off. Well, no, because despair is not a feeling. It's, if you look at the root of the word, it's like not being spirited.
And he should have said that in the first paragraph.
Well, it took him a little
despair
while.
is the sickness unto death, and despair is not a state. It is this disorder in the relation of the perceiver to the perceived.
Well, that's what he said. Despair is the sickness of the spirit, of the self. That's in the first paragraph.
He didn't put it in such a way I could get it. He's pointing to it with his finger. He's so smug. I don't want to do these in person anymore. No, wait a minute. Read that again.
Despair is a sickness of the spirit, of the self. And so it can have three forms: being unconscious in despair of having a self, inauthentic despair, not wanting in despair to be oneself, and wanting in despair to be oneself. It doesn't say it's sadness.
No, it doesn't. But when I read that, I read sadness is a sickness of the spirit of the self. It's so on, blah, 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 blah. But when he says state, it's a state. Mm-hmm. For me, that clarified it. You know, and these words, you know, it's hard to decode all this stuff and come to terms. I mean, I know he couldn't have done this in 8 pages. You know, he gets more clarity out of 153 or whatever it is than he would have 8. But state clarifies it for me much more.
Page 57. So for all you new atheists out there, this is a Christian writing and Christian book. So
does it have to be?
No. Well, it wouldn't work with Zeus.
Okay.
Because Zeus is not the infinite.
Okay.
Might work. What's the Hindu infinite thing? Hindus have millions. Somebody's going to write
it's an elephant. I don't know.
No, they have millions of gods, but then there's like something beyond the gods. It's like, is Hinduism really polytheistic? Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
So, but some relation to, we're just going to call it God. Zeus wouldn't work. So let's see. This is page 57. So much is spoken about wasting one's life, but the only life wasted is the life of one who so lived it, deceived by life's pleasures or its sorrows, that he never became decisively, eternally conscious of himself as spirit, as self, or what is the same. He never became aware and gained in the deepest sense of impression that there is a God there, and that he himself, his self, exists before this God, which infinite gain is never come by except through despair. So there's a lot in there.
Would you like me to run it through the translator?
Sure.
If he doesn't know he's screwing up, the self being that which is in relation to all of its relations, he has no relation that shows that he is screwing up to relate to. He doesn't know. It's not a wasted life for him because he can't perceive that it was waste. So all my normie friends that are sitting in the cubicle right now, and I'm talking to my wife, I'm like, man, I wish old Stinky didn't have to go and, with the abacus and do all that at the cubicle. Well, he's like, he can make the boat payment. He doesn't care. Like, it's not a waste for him. He doesn't understand.
So maybe he doesn't understand and doesn't experience any sadness, but it's kind of a life on automatic.
Yes, and he says there on whatever page that was, 51 or whatever, and the instant he despairs over it will be evidence that he had always despaired of it.
Yeah. But it'll also be the moment that something could happen. Somewhere later in the book, I'm not going to have all these quotes handy, he talks about the Christian category of sin. The pagans didn't have sin, and I think that's true. So if you read the Iliad, which you should, Achilles didn't commit any sins. There's no repentance. Nobody ever says you're being evil.
There's piousness, but no sin.
Right. Sure. Yeah. There's piety, but no sin.
Which is hard for me to comprehend. It seems like they're buddies.
So you do something like you don't show hospitality, and that's impiety. But Zeus is not a big enough god to cause genuine repentance, because he's a dick too.
Well, he moves the yardsticks. Like, what would sin be when he's so capricious and all that? Like,
so sin doesn't happen. It's interesting in Kierkegaard's reading of Genesis. They don't know what sin is. Adam and Eve don't know what sin is until God tells them. Sin is something revealed, because what it means is to do something wrong before God, before an infinite creator whom you're in relationship with. That's what makes it bad. So if I eat meat on a Friday, okay, which is still our rule over in Eastern Catholic stand, and you say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a hot dog. No, it was a big deal because, especially if I remembered, it'd be that I said, you know what? Screw you, God, I'm having a hot dog.
Hot dog's never just a hot dog.
And so it has that possibility because of that relationship, if that relationship's real, of a relationship with an infinite God, that eating a hot dog could be a mortal sin. And people used to make fun and say, that's ridiculous. It's just a hot dog. No, it's not just a hot dog. It's the defiance. Augustine talks about that in book 2 or book 3 of the Confessions when he steals the pear. They were lousy pears. They threw them to the pigs. Nobody really cared about the pears. Well, what was so bad that he's talking about this 30 years later when he's writing the book?
Spite.
He did it just because it was forbidden. That's a thing that a free creature can do. Okay? That's what a creature capable of despair can do. You can just say, no, screw you. I don't care. I was thinking of having us read Notes from the Underground, which is all about spite.
Yeah. I've tried that one twice.
You can't make it?
I hadn't yet. I can't. I'm not going to say I can't, but I haven't.
But you can just do things just because they're wrong. Milton can't do that. He just can't. Milton the cat cannot do that. But we can. And so maybe Cubicle John, what's Cubicle guy's name?
What I call him, Stanky? Stanky
in the cubicle. He can't really do anything, super bad because he's in despair.
Because his HR overlords are keeping him in line?
Well, because none of it's really a conscious choice. He's just doing the sort of things that one does. But it also means there can't be any genuine repentance or, positive relationship. It's just, I'm just going to go do my thing. And it's not even, when I say I'm going to do my thing, there's hardly even an I there.
Yeah. That's why despair for Stinky.
And so it would probably be a good thing if he realized and looked out over the cubicle farm and said, oh my gosh. And then he can make a choice and say, well, this is good because it pays for it pays the mortgage. I can make a choice. Yes. But now it's a freely chosen thing rather than just, autopilot.
So if the self decides that the cubicle farm's where he needs to be, all things considered, then the despair in terms of that resolves.
I think so. Your external conditions don't matter as much as your internal.
I highlighted this and wrote next to it, this guy sucks. Even what, humanly speaking, is the most beautiful and loveliest thing of all, a womanly youthfulness, which is sheer peace and harmony and joy, is nevertheless despair. What?
But keep reading. No. For while it can be counted the greatest good fortune is not a specification of spirit. So she's real pretty.
But that doesn't mean that womanly youthfulness is despair. But he says it is despair. Now, he didn't say masks despair.
All right. I get your point.
He could have said masks despair. It causes.
That's for sure.
But he doesn't say that. He said this lady that worked for me, who was really bright and a great help, but she thought out loud. So she would say all kinds of ridiculous things because she's kind of brainstorming, and I can hear it. And it took me a long time of working with her to realize that she wasn't handicapped, but that she said all of the things that she thought that were possibilities for solving a problem before she arrived at the best one.
Yeah.
Is he doing that to me a little bit?
Maybe.
Because this good-looking girl who is sheer harmony and peace and joy, that is not despair. Well, if it is, I want a little more.
But that itself is not... it's not going to solve all your problems.
But he says is.
I know. For a certain value of is. It all matters. Depends on what the meaning of is.
Do you need another cruise?
No, I haven't been able, because I'm holding the microphone today. I haven't been able to drink it very much.
I managed to drink mine. Did you know in Smokey the Bandit, they wanted the beer to be Lone Star beer?
I did not know that.
And Lone Star wouldn't pay for the product placement, and it ended up being Coors.
Big mistake.
Big mistake. Big mistake.
I need to watch that again.
When's the last time you saw it?
15 years ago.
No, that's too long. We watch that Easter Monday every year.
We watch Rocky on Easter Sunday.
Oh my goodness.
Page 56, bottom of 56. He who says without pretense that he despairs is after all a little nearer a dialectical step. I'm not sure what he means by dialectical, but a dialectical step nearer being cured than those who are not regarded and those who do not regard themselves as being in despair. So you start to have that unease.
First, you have to admit that there's a problem, Carl. That's one of the steps.
But that's not what he's talking. He's not talking about pop psychology.
Maybe that's some pop psychology, but it has utility. Like, if you're going to be a problem solver, you've got to know that there's a problem.
Yes.
But, the next sentence, but as the connoisseur of souls will no doubt concede, the normal situation is exactly this, that most people live without being properly conscious of being characterized as spirit. And to this one can trace all the so-called security, contentment with life, which is exactly despair. Now, I don't know about that last clause, but these folks that feel a great sense of contentment and security, I always look at them and wonder what's wrong, like they had a head injury or something. But the normal situation is that. But he says it is exactly despair. But then later on in the book, he says, well, if you don't feel security, if you don't feel contentment, that too is despair.
Yes, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Right. It's an inescapable state, which is a condition of being a self.
Lutheran.
Being a Lutheran?
Well, after all, he is a Lutheran. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Walker Percy.
Always this Percy guy.
I know.
Did you read anything else?
Yeah. I was reading, what was I reading? On the car on the way here, I was having read to me, I think it's called Warp Marines. It's got space marines, humans are fighting aliens and turning out to be the bad guys. It's good fun.
You were reading that Kegel guy.
Which Kegel guy?
The one with the theory of history and all that.
You mean Hegel?
Okay, Hegel.
Kegels are something else.
Yeah. Oh, I like one of those things. He deuces on Hegel a little bit in here. I was thinking about Hegel and his theory of history. Like, that is such a stupid idea. It personifies history.
Mm-hmm.
Anthropomorphizes history. We're going to have to do some Hegel about that. Oh, my goodness. We're going to have to do Marx's.
I'd rather do Marx than Hegel, I think.
Marx's history. What is that? The one about Louis the 16th or whatever? The 17th Brumaire or whatever that one is?
Hegel's hard. I'm not sure there's a there in Hegel. Pretty sure there's a there here.
So he says that there's something happens in terms of history, and then there's a reaction to that, and then history sort of settles down in between them, in between the two extremes.
Mm-hmm. And that there's a movement of history.
And that there's a movement. It's progressivism.
Sure.
But, and it
hopeful.
anthropomorphizes history. Like, history has a sets of behaviors and proclivities, and it's just daffy.
Yeah. Not a fan. Not a fan.
Dialectic. The Hegelian
Dialectical materialism. Yeah.
Well, Hegel talk get you some of that art school stuff.
I don't know how much cachet Hegel has anymore.
Cachet. Oh my goodness.
Heidegger used to have a fair bit, but I think he's probably on hard times now.
Good.
Heidegger, darn it, Heidegger is so smart. You read it and you think that you've learned something, and then you get done and say, "What did I just learn?"
If the reader is interested in this book,
The listener.
The listener is interested in becoming a reader of this book, I think starting with book 1, C, the forms of the sickness, I think you can split it. I mean, just move on. He just mashes and marks up and hashes out all the different forms of, I shouldn't say forms, states of despair, maybe. And I don't know. Maybe if you don't think you're in despair, you can read those, and then you'll say, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe that's me." And then you'll find out you were always in despair, because even when you weren't, you were.
For me, page 63. Finitude's despair is to lack infinitude. This is in section beta.
Yeah.
So we have alpha, beta. Worldliness is precisely to ascribe infinite value to the indifferent. Okay, there's another clue for you. Thinking that pretty much anything is the supreme important thing. That's a mistake.
Dude, you deserve to be happy. You should leave her because you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be happy, bro.
No, I don't.
See, when you said that, you were despairing.
No, maybe. Yeah, almost certainly I am. But that I deserved it. No, you don't deserve to be happy. That there are things that you should do.
But life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's our.
If you understand happiness as an emotional state, nobody deserves an emotional state. You can't even guarantee your emotional state in an hour.
I'm working on a tech startup that will provide happiness.
I don't think it's going to work. And even if it did, it doesn't matter.
Because if we could just get 0.1% of the world's population to buy our app that provides happiness, it'll be worth billions.
So what you're really saying is you are after profit.
Profit, see, is a Randian measure of utility and helps you provided to the marketplace. So the more profitable it is, the more you know you help the other. Because the cost of inputs, they could secure those at the same rates that you could, Karl. So if they're willing to pay you more than the cost of inputs, which are also available to them, then that difference is the price that you can put on the help that you gave them. QED, the price of happiness. So the more money my company makes, the happier the world will be.
I think there's something fishy in there.
Well, we haven't gone public yet. Is that what you mean? I mean, we're not a Delaware corporation as yet.
I think that just because you have ascribed a value to something doesn't mean that is the value of the thing. It doesn't even mean that the thing exists or that you have any idea what it is.
Well, value implies that it's quantitative and that you can put a number on it. And why not put the United States Federal Reserve note?
If you pay $40 for a bottle of Weller, does that mean it's $40 of happiness?
No, because it's only the difference between the price of the corn and the capital investments that depreciated per bottle, pro rata depreciation. $30. Well, yeah, that's how much happy. Yes, that's it.
I think there's a category error.
There can't be. I went to Wharton. And insane.
Right.
Okay.
Worldliness, precisely to ascribe infinite value to the indifferent. Things just aren't important. Maybe there's one thing that's important.
What's that? Oh, the self.
No, the self's relationship to its creator. That might be the one thing that's important.
Oh.
And then everything else gets its importance from that. Because if the first one's wrong, then the rest of them are wrong, or if the first one doesn't exist, the rest of them don't really matter, and we're back to being pagans with splendid vices.
I would like that versus pagans with no vices.
Splendid vices would be better.
I'm sorry, with no virtues.
Yeah. Splendid vices would be better. I'd rather have Cato than Bill Gates.
Aristotle. Yeah. Than Bill Gates, that we said?
Yeah.
He wants to block out the sun for your own good, Karl.
He's a Bond villain.
He wants to block out. Mr. Burns did that. He wants to block out the sun so that you won't get too hot. Because being too hot will be the death of us all.
He's ascribing infinite value to hotness.
I like playing this free market peckerhead. I like playing this character. This Bill Gates apologist.
Yeah,
he's become an evil. He's become a Bond villain, an evil scientist, a mad scientist. He's going to shoot a substance known to cause cancer by the state of California into the atmosphere so that you won't get too warm.
I know, it's laughable.
It's crazy.
You write a movie.
Oh, Lord.
I'm trying to dig up quotes here. It is not a systematic book.
No. I was particularly interested in the unnoticed despair that he talks about. Already mentioned a couple of those quotes. Here's another one. By seeing the multitude of people around it, by being busied with all sorts of worldly affairs, by being wise to the ways of the world, such a person forgets himself. In a divine sense, forgets his own name, dares not believe in himself, finds being himself too risky, finds it much easier and safer to be like the others, to become a copy, a number along with the crowd. Now, this form of despair goes practically unnoticed in the world. It's the blue pill, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's great. Why can't you be happy? Just do what everyone else does.
Yes. But this person here dares not believe in himself, dares not, finds it much easier. This is a person that is actively not looking behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. So the quote I gave, 2 rants ago, was a guy that just didn't know. The guy in the cubicle, he just doesn't know. This guy is actively avoiding knowing.
So this is different. So the first guy thinks happiness is whatever you said it was, the excess value after material.
Well, it's loosely profit is the measure of good you do. So Jeff Bezos right now is the best person.
Okay, so this is one kind of person who honestly hasn't really thought about this at all.
Bezos?
No, you.
Oh.
The second sort of person would be the kind that, happiness might be an ill-defined concept or I might be full of shit, but I'm not going to test it because I don't have anything better. Therefore, happiness is the, excess value. So you turn away from it. You don't want to look. You just don't want to think about the possibility that there's an abyss opening under you. Somewhere Kierkegaard has this image of, I guess he would freak out if he swam in a really deep lake and then start to think that that's 2,000 feet down.
You think birds think that?
No. I think birds are much happier than we are.
Oh.
Kant says that somewhere. If the mind is designed for happiness, it's a very poor design. Maybe the purpose of having a mind and having freedom isn't happiness. Because your dog's probably happy. If you fed it, it's happy.
Sounds good.
Give it a little affection, it's happy. And humans, no, you put them in good situations and they things go badly. So there might be something else going on. I would say a book like this and thinking about, some people even say, oh, there's no freedom. Humans aren't even free. Determinist. Freedom's an illusion. I don't think it matters if it's an illusion because you still think you are.
Right.
Humans are incredibly weird.
Are they? Wait a minute. Do they have to be? They can be weird, but do they have to be incredibly weird?
Yes, they're incredibly weird. Okay, imagine the aliens come down. And the aliens are not weird. The aliens are ordinary. Okay? And they're just doing some galactic survey or something. And they stop down here. What's going on here? And they see these two guys, these two humans, sitting with microphones, making mouth noises. Well, what are they making mouth noises about? Are they, there's fields around? Are they talking about what they're going to plant? No, I'm not planting anything. Are they talking about dinner tonight? No. They're talking about a book by a voluncell, not an incel.
Yeah, a volcel, yeah.
A volcel Danish guy who wrote obscurely and thinks everybody is in despair. That's weird. The amount of time that humans devote to talking, to non-productive talking, it's like most of it.
Like this.
Yeah. Non-productive in the sense of your character that you were doing.
But that character doesn't think so. And I live in constant state of despair that the stuff I'm saying may be just as rubbish.
I don't know. I'd rather have our rubbish.
Oh, I like my rubbish too. Yeah, for sure. Look, everybody's making stuff up. I got in a debate on Slack with a guy a couple of days ago. Good guy. And we started the conversation talking about Jordan Peterson.
Uh-oh.
And then we started talking about Peterson's views on objective truth. And then we got into this difficulty where my interlocutor, I want to be fair to him, I think that he thought our difficulty with nailing down the truth was some sort of evidence that maybe it wasn't objective. It seems like if it was a fixed thing in a fixed place, we could hit it with an arrow. And the fact that we can't do that might be evidence that it's not objective. Well, I think it's evidence that our arrows aren't any good and that the bow is broken and the guy pulling it's dumb and got Parkinson's. And like, it's about us. It's not about the truth.
Yeah. Or there's this. You choose. So a judgment is an affirmation that is chosen. You can choose not to affirm the thing that you're seeing.
I know that's right.
The previous pope said something about ethics once. He said, so people will argue in ethics that because these things are continually debated over the centuries, that means that there's nothing there to debate, that there isn't any truth. He says, no, that's not the case. The reason we debate it is because every generation needs to be reconvinced because they're free people with a will. So, of course, we see everything differently, and we can choose to see things differently, and you can win an argument with somebody. I know you've had this experience. You can win an argument, and the person will acknowledge, you won that argument, but I still don't agree.
Yeah, here's what they say. Yeah, but still.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but still. That's what they say.
That's incredible to me. You know, I've quoted that line from Thomas Aquinas to you a bunch of times. This is from the Good Summa, the Summa Contra Gentiles. He's trying to write a Summa for the nations, for the non-Christians. And so he can't use the Bible because they don't accept it. So he says, we are forced to have appeal to natural reason, to which all men must give assent.
Yeah, but still, Thomas.
They don't give assent. They can freely choose not to give assent. Maybe in Thomas's day, they were more likely to assent once you convinced them of something.
Seems like it.
Sure does. Beginning of this podcast, we're talking about, well, what's the difference? You know, 1840 Copenhagen, I think part of the difference is prosperity.
Instrumentation, Thomas Bacon.
Yeah. Nature as to be conquered, not to be.
Well, you said about obtaining knowledge of the specific from the general. What was that you said earlier in the show?
Heck, I don't know.
Yeah, come on, quote yourself from an hour ago. Well,
we know things through abstracted forms. And so to know the individual is through intellect isn't quite possible.
Right. And I totally agree with that. And, you know, Scotus says, but there's a form of this or being or one or is or
thisness. Yeah.
Thisness. Yeah. Okay. Parmenides says all those other things. Well, I think Thomas is right. And I think I've given this example on this show. You know, you drop a ball 10,000 times and you have no proof that if you drop it, turn loose of it, it's going to fall again. You have no proof of that. Got a good reason to think maybe it will, but we can't prove it. And I was talking to my kids about this the other day. I said, you know, since Bacon and instrumentation, people do not trust their lying eyes. They verify truth claims by consensus. All science at this point is consensus. You publish a paper. You said, I dropped this ball 10,000 times. And if enough people say, yeah, you're right about the paper, the ball's going to fall again. It's a deadlock certainty. Everybody writes it in the book. It's in the appendix B in the back of the physics book. I have never seen in a science textbook, you know, this is a theory and the ball may not fall. I think that's important to say. It's important to say.
Yeah.
It has consequences for everything. And then.
But that's metaphysics.
Well, right. That's the uber physics. And the reliance on instrumentation, you know, so you see these, you know, swirls and curves in a bubble chamber. And then now we think there's black holes that destroy information because somebody came up with math and they don't understand math. So heuristic and it's not reality. It's not.
Is physics in despair?
It is, but it doesn't know it yet. But the instant it realizes it, it will have been in despair all along.
Right. And the reason why I say this, if despair, bear with me, dear listener, if despair is what Kierkegaard said, to not be in relationship to the infinite, and you teach laws of nature as laws, as immutable laws, but don't realize that there's a hole in your logic, then you are not in relationship to the infinite and physics is in despair. To talk about the law of gravity as a law without realizing it needs an infinite ground to be 100% all the time law.
Yeah. What are gravities?
I don't know. There's Gravo the gravity elf that is invisible and ubiquitous, who walks up and takes that pen and pulls it down when you drop it. And
as soon as we come up with an alphometer, we'll be able to see that. But the mathematical model shows.
I'm working on it. I have a startup.
Oh, my God. Oh, yeah? Have you gone through first round yet? First round investors?
No. We're still prototyping.
We'll talk. When did technology become just like graphic interfaces for SQL databases on phones? Like, when did that become technology? We just did a show on Les Paul. He was like soldering wires together and making things that had never existed. And now a bunch of wingnuts are like, got a database that matches people with cars, with people who need rides. And like, oh, this is technology. Like, really? Like, there was a lady that sat at the switchboard at Southwestern Bell in the 1920s and did that.
Well, all right.
Is this Kierkegaard? I'm despairing, Karl. I can't be myself in this world.
I think you're mocking him.
No, I'm not.
Sorry, go ahead. I think the cell phone could be understood as a giant despair obscurer. Except it's not giant. A portable despair. It's not a despairometer. It's a a despair occultometer. I'm trying to come up with a good name for it. Okay, because when you watch people, and yeah, I do this too sometimes. I was just out there doom scrolling on the few social medias that I'm still on. I love that term, doom scrolling. I got that from Brett McKay's show, where you just, you know how you just keep scrolling down the infinite list of Faceagram or Instabook. It's a way to distract me from ever thinking or choosing or doing anything that might actually be the things that I most need to do. Everything's all right. I mean, look at Snapchat. It's funny today. Or TikTok or whatever. Everything's fine.
We need to do a show about TikTok dancing.
Do we really?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I don't want to. But, put the thing down. I used to, 20 years ago, I would tell my students, just as a test, they were commuters, don't turn the radio on in your car on the way home. And they wouldn't do it. They just wouldn't do it. They needed the noise, because if you turn the noise off, you might think. And I think there's a secret fear of despair. And do the same thing with the phone. And gosh, even like I have these dreams. Like if I ever move, I want to make one room be the internet room. This is my dream. I don't know if it'll happen. And like put blockers or something, or lock up all the phones. So unless you're in that room, you can go to that room and do your internet work, but you have to leave that room, and then you have to leave it behind.
There's a 3-foot Ethernet cable in there.
Yep.
You have the key to that room on a hubcap.
Well, it'll have a Faraday cage. No, it's going to have Wi-Fi in there, but it'll have a Faraday cage, so it won't go outside the room. I'll have that built in.
So I now live in this metal building, and there are dead spots in here where I can't get cell phone reception. And one of my buddies says, you need to get one of these cell phone boosters so you get reception there. It's like, no, I'm going to sit in that fucking corner.
That's the best spot.
That's where I sit,
If you want to get your Kierkegaard reading done, that's where you go sit.
Right.
Take your phone, put it somewhere else. Don't touch it for an hour.
I'm looking at mine right now. You can't stop me. No, I'm not making fun of him. I think, as I read on, I despair that I cannot be myself, Carl.
Well, you might be in despair of that. You might be wanting in despair to be oneself.
Wanting in despair to be oneself.
Yeah, this one was my favorite.
Yeah,
this is like demonic defiance.
Oh yeah. No, I am the defiant one. Oh yeah, for sure. I'm like possessed by a rage that verges on demonic. To express my selfness.
This is Julius Caesar.
I want to show my selfness to everyone. What page is that?
You know you're wrong. I mean, it starts on 98, but I'm going to give a quote from the end. You know you're wrong. You know you're in trouble. Let's see, page 103. This finally fixes itself so firmly in his head that he becomes frightened of eternity for a rather strange reason. He's afraid in case it should take away from him what, from a demonic viewpoint, gives him infinite superiority over other people. Himself is what he wants to be. He began with the infinite abstraction of the self and has now finally become so concrete that it would be impossible to become eternal in that sense, and yet he wants in despair to be himself. Demonic madness. He rages most of all at the thought that eternity could get into his head to take his misery away from him. So there you are. You've decided to become the world's best serial killer. Not because you're a psychopath. This is just a project of yours. Mm-hmm. And you always are going to do the best that you can.
Right, because we're good people.
And you've succeeded, right? And now it's your thing. And, maybe somebody says, you probably really shouldn't be a serial killer. You probably shouldn't kill people. Like, I'm not looking that way. I don't want to know. You see this in people with addictive behavior, that the possibility is there for you not to do this thing. Absolutely not. I don't even want to know about the possibility of not doing the thing. Because I love myself as I am, and I want to stay that way. I think that rings true to me.
I had this guitar teacher who had been a counselor. I think I've told about this guitar teacher.
Yes.
And I said, I'm something. I don't remember what exactly it was. We'll say I said I'm lazy. I don't know. And he says, no, you are not lazy. You have been being lazy. It was very important to get someone to dissociate the self from the patterns of behavior. and to not identify with that behavier. So
Yeah.
you didn't see that as an aspect of your, like eye color or something.
Yeah, I think that's right. I read a therapy book once that was saying that, when people say you're not your history,
right.
I think that's another way of saying the same thing. But sometimes we really want to be our history. He ends that, this made me laugh. I actually wrote, page 105. It is, to describe it figuratively, as if a writer were to make a slip of the pen, and the error became conscious of itself as such.
Yeah.
Perhaps it wasn't a mistake, but from a much higher point of view, an essential ingredient in the whole presentation, and as if this error wanted now to rebel against the author, out of hatred for him, forbade him to correct it, and in manic defiance say to him, "No, I will not be erased. I will stand as a witness against you, a witness to the fact that you are a second-rate author."
Yeah.
Written by a writer. The error takes over and wants to be itself. That, to me, that's the despair of, what does he call it? The despair of wanting in despair to be oneself. Defiance.
Yeah, that would probably be. Not being willing to have hope in the possibility of the removal of an earthly need, a temporal cross, is also a form of despair. That is what the despairer who wants in despair to be himself is not willing to do.
Yeah. People that have behaviors that they know are bad. So a person has made resolution and is trying to fix his life as he sees it. And you say, well, why didn't you do it 5 years ago? Or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago? Why did it take so long? Because you're more fond of the self that is than the very frightening self that you could be if you embraced freedom and just didn't do the darn thing. That's despair. That's defiance. That's, I'm going to be myself no matter what. It's more important to me.
If the root of this state of despair, though, is that the one does not accurately know the self. And you can only know the self by having a relationship of the thing that stands outside of the self and can observe it neutrally.
But the only one that could do that would be the infinite.
Yeah. Okay, we're done. I mean, I think that's what he said.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the bit in the end about, yes. I was telling you last night that, well, it comes back to the ending. I mean, there is a payoff, and it's the same as the beginning, which he says in the very end of the book. On the other hand, that opposition has been effective throughout this work, which laid down straight away, part 1, first paragraph, the formula for that state in which there is no despair at all, in relating itself to itself and in wanting to be itself. The self is grounded transparently in the power which established it, which formula, in turn, as has frequently been remarked, is the definition of faith. There you go. The ending is the beginning. The middle is torturous, useful, I think. I like the stuff on sin. I thought that was interesting, that it calls it the opposite of faith and that it only comes about by revelation. I thought that was interesting. And that if you couldn't despair, you couldn't really sin.
Because despair is the state that I think maps right on to that original sin idea.
Yeah. And it's also a capability. Milton can't sin. Much as he wants to, he can't.
He wants to.
Can't do it. It's like, darn it, I don't really have free will. Otherwise, they would get it. But I, being a cat, I'm just going to respond to stimulus like I always do.
I liked it. I'm glad I read it.
He says grudgingly.
These guys with their languages that only 2 million people speak, and then wacky ways of thinking. Once I started identifying all of his terms, the arguments kind of presented themselves. Like, if this is what a self is, and if the self actually exists, it has to be observable. What would observe it? Well, it's his infinite.
Yeah, he's a bit stronger. The one that establishes it in the relationship.
Establishes it, yeah. The reason I was thinking about it in terms of observing it is because I was thinking about like the first 11 questions in Thomas about the prime mover. Not that his arguments were the same, but I was thinking about it with the same sorts of methods. Motion has to come from somewhere. Well, if we don't want to have an infinite regress problem, we got to have a prime mover. What would cause it to move? If you encounter certain conditions, if they're simple and if the conditions are defined well enough, the answers, like Holmes says, no matter how improbable, have to be That has to be the answer.
Yeah.
And that's the way I was thinking about
Yeah.
his terms, and was able to kind of construct his arguments in my own mind.
Edith Stein says somewhere on like proofs, like Thomistic proofs, your primary examples of causality are in the mental realm. They're in the, you make a thought, your arm moves.
That's not how it works, though.
How is it?
Think about moving your arm. Nope. I could think about moving my arm and it doesn't move. It's actually different.
It's a different kind of thought.
Right. And it's not
a decision. We'll put it that way. You make a choice, whatever choosing is, and then the arm moves.
Yeah, but you can't be like and move your arm. Like it's a, it's not liminal thought.
Well, there you go.
Subliminal.
Now we have from phenomenology an establishment of there is an intellect and there is a will, and they're two different things.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so where we lose our way, I think, is when we bring instrumentation in there, and because these things, if there is a relation that is a relation of its relations, you're not going to see it on the functional MRI.
No.
If you're Richard Dawkins and you think you know something about one thing, and you bring that toolbox to this other thing and ignore the phenomenology, you're going to go awry. Because if your theory doesn't match the phenomenology, it can't be right. Yep. It can't be. I don't care how insulted you are about the idea that some people believe in a space friend or any other idea. If your ideas don't match the phenomenology, you're just wrong. Wait a minute. If my ideas don't match the phenomenology, I'm wrong.
Yeah. So philosophy is, if it's anything, it's an attempt to understand human experience. Because human experience, your own human experience, is the first thing that you start with. And so I used to do this.
It's the only thing.
It's the main, it's the mainest thing. When I was a teenager, I was an annoying determinist.
Mm-hmm. And
I remember I was in an argument with my dad. He won't listen to this, but. And I was like, yeah, if you knew the initial conditions, you could determine the subsequent state of everything in the universe, and it's all predetermined. And he says, oh yeah, is this predetermined? And he swerves the car off the road. And I said, well, actually, yes.
Actually,
no, it's not. It's not, because what that does, you're going outside of the mind. The mind is the place you start. It's not the only thing there is, but it's where you start. Like your friend said, from the inside, it all looks the same. You start on the inside, and then you make an argument from everything on the outside, and then come back and say something that you really experience very profoundly on the inside isn't real. You've got it backwards. You experience yourself as free. That's good enough. You're free.
Yep.
You can't get behind that.
What about this? What if you're free but experience yourself as enslaved? Now you're in a state of despair.
Or you're a Stoic.
He says that's a despair. He says that's a kind of
splendid
despair.
vice of the pagans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was a good book, but
you're glad to have read it?
Yeah, I am. I'll read it again. There's not a lot I'll read again because the infinity stack, if you reread you've got an infinity stack.
Yes.
I have an infinity stack. And then we have an infinity stack.
Yes.
And then I'm going to reread some of each of those three infinity stacks.
Yeah.
How many infinities is that?
6.
Because how many is sum of an infinity? An infinity.
Yep.
Yeah. So are we really at 6? Now, what about this?
There's probably an infinity of infinity stacks.
What if I have a book? I have a set of books on my infinity stack that are also in our infinity stack.
I think that makes it a smaller infinity.
See, it doesn't match the phenomenology, so it's rubbish. It doesn't matter. Now, when he talks about finitude and infinity in here a lot.
Yeah.
But he's not talking about like a Newtonian infinity.
No, I think
he's talking about here's the measurable and here's the immeasurable.
Boundedness and unboundedness, probably.
That's fine.
Yeah, a finis is like a boundary line.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily numerical.
I can get down with that kind of infinity.
Yeah.
But this unlimited quantity kind of infinity, no, can't be true. It's a spell that we had cast on us.
It's calculus. Violates the phenomenology. It's not real. Kierkegaard is an interesting guy. Lived a short, not too long of a life. His life story is, he had this girl. He should have married her, but he couldn't. There's a lot of that, like that youth, that girl with the youth, and that was probably Regina. He would write in pseudonyms.
Yeah, he wrote this one, right?
This is Anticlimacus. So there's John Climacus, who's
is he a scholastic?
No, it's pre-Middle Ages monk. A lot of monasteries will read the Ladder of St. John Climacus during Lent at dinner time. I think Fear and Trembling is a dynamite book that'll keep you up at night if you think you are a believer. You'll say, am I really? I think his claims in there are a bit strong, but I didn't pick that one. He wrote a book called Either Or, which is all about the stages of life and how people live. And first part's fun. There's the seducer's diary, and then there's the judge's response. It's like letters.
He said either or. He keeps talking about dialectic in here.
Yeah.
And he uses these words in non-standard ways, or at least to my thinking. And I never quite knew.
Honestly, I'm not sure either. His dissertation was on Socrates, Socratic irony. So there's a bunch of irony in it.
Socrates is not ironic.
Socrates is what?
He's not ironic.
Okay.
He's hitting you on the head all the time. He's not trying to crack a joke or poke fun or...
See, I think Socratic irony is the things that he says are not false, and he doesn't think they're false. They are shown to be false when the characters he's talking to are not in earnest. Oh, Mino, you are so wise. Obviously, you must be wise because you're asking me about virtue, and I'm not even sure what it is. You know, is he blowing smoke up Mino's ass, or it's stuff that would be true if Mino were not a lying politician just trying to get advantage?
You know, I was reading on the toilet this morning.
I didn't know that.
I was reading Dialogue of Justin, Philosopher and Martyr, with Trypho. Mm-hmm. That'd be a pretty good one.
What are we going to read next?
We talked about reading that new Peterson book. I don't know if I can do it. Can we do it?
I can do it if you can do it.
Yeah. You know, I had him on this show. Matt Reynolds and I discussed his book, 12 Rules for whatever.
12 Rules for Radicals?
No, on the Barbell Logic show, and I went too easy on him in that Barbell Logic show. I'm not going to go easy on him this time.
Sorry, I've never read any of this stuff. I've seen a couple interviews.
I hope I'm just as rough on him as I was Kierkegaard, and I hope he redeems himself just as much as Kierkegaard did. I suspect that he's no Kierkegaard.
Yeah, we can do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's a longer book. I hope I can slog through it. I'll probably do a little mix of audio and reading, and hopefully I can get through that. I got 10 hours of Texas windshield this weekend, so hopefully I can get some of it out. Yeah. So stay tuned for that. We're going to read that. What is it? Beyond Order by a Jordan B. Peterson. Definitely not meth.
Yeah, he had a little incident in the last year or two. It was not well.
No.
Seems to be better now.
I don't think so.
I haven't seen... Has he given any interviews?
Yeah, he's been doing his podcast and some stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Go breeze through Maps of Meaning for just a little bit sometime. That's a troubled dude. Yeah, so we'll talk about that. And if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, yeah, tune on in, and then you'll be mad, I think. And enrollment opens April 12th. And will run for 7 days, whatever that math works out to. So it closes on like
the 19th,
September. What?
If it's 7 days, that would be April 12th to April 19th.
The calendar math is weird. Weeks should be 10 days.
It starts 3 days before the Ides of April.
Okay.
Unless April, the Ides are the 13th. Sometimes they're the 13th.
Yeah. So go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast and sign up there. Listen, if you're going to sign up, please go through onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast so that we know that you listen to the show and that maybe this helped you join, because that's how we know that this thing is worth doing. Because Karl and I could have just done this, and I could have said all the words I wanted to say instead of just a sum of them, and that would have been better. And then I could fully be myself, and in that respect, I could shake off that state of despair. Mm-hmm. And go listen to the Music and Ideas podcast. We just put out one a week or so ago about sugary doom, Karl calls it. Weird pop lyrics, pop pathos in lyrics. Go listen to that. And then we got another one coming out here pretty soon about Les Paul. And I think that's going to be a good show.
I want to leave off Kierkegaard with a
quote from Hegel.
It's a thought bomb. So I'll just talk about the self as a subsistent relation. And even talk of the self itself, I think, is the philosophical baggage of the Christian theological doctrine of the Trinity. They don't think about the self very much before that, because what's a self? But once you have, so Augustine says, or he doesn't talk about the self, but a person. What's a person? A person is whatever there are three of in the Trinity. Before that, the idea that there's a person that's somehow conceptually distinct from the physical mass of you sitting in that chair, that's just a weird idea. I don't think Achilles would know what you were talking about.
His wine dark sea was blue.
Yes, it's because it was in the North Sea.
Oh, and Troy was Atlantis?
Yep. There you go. There's some thought bombs for you.
Yeah, very
thought
good.
Grenades. They'll go off in like a week.
Very good. Talk to you guys soon. Thank you for listening.